Okay,
Okay.
you're set to go.
So the concerto for piano and orchestra that we number as number 9, and that the cataloger of Mozart's work, Kirchel, gave the Kirchel number, catalog number 271 to, was written in Salzburg by a young Mozart. He was born in 1756, and this concerto comes from 1777. Both times it was January. Mozart was almost 21. And he had been writing music for many years already because he was one of the most talented young musicians ever born. But some of the early music sounds like the music of a youngster, whereas this concerto, really the first of his piano concertos, to be phenomenally put together and crafted and really make a statement to the listener that's unforgettable. This one is the work of a artist, not of a child, not of a youth, but of a phenomenal artist. The piece was a pleasure for Mozart to write, and we know that it had the nickname since the early 20th century, at least, of jeune homme, because Mozart was so often referred to as a jeune homme, and because he had written that the concerto was for a jeune homme, and people thought maybe it was about jeune homme. But in 2003, the Austrian music historian Michael Lorenz finally made it clear that it was nothing to do with being a young man or that he had met a young woman. It was that the name of a woman who was about 7 or so years older than Mozart, and who obviously could play the piano, or the forte piano back then, could play it, and might have asked him if he would write something for her to play, or perhaps simply inspired him through her station, her character, her charm, or maybe her talent. Her name, because of marriage, through marriage to a Joseph jeune ami, was really what Mozart was referring to when he said jeune homme. She was very, very interestingly the daughter of a friend of Mozart's. And he was none other than probably the single finest ballet master alive at the time. A dancer and ballet master who is in history considered perhaps the originator of the whole notion of action ballet, of a story being told in ballet rather than just movements that dancers make. So he was Mozart's friend, and his daughter naturally came by when visiting Salzburg, because Mozart had been in Paris some years earlier, or in France, I think it was in Paris, had met with the daughter and the father. And so that's the explanation of the name. But whatever inspired Mozart to write this piece, it is a masterwork. And even someone as brilliant in piano as Brendel, Alfred Brendel, has said that really none of the later piano concertos is really better. They're different. They're wonderful. But this stands with them as a true masterpiece. It's in 3 movements, and those are marked allegro, which is fast, and andantino, which is a little slower than andante, which is considered to be at the tempo in which a person walks. Left, right, left, left. Not marches, but walks. So an andantino is a little bit slower, and then the last movement's a presto. And that really indicates speed. That's quick, very, very quick. Now, symphonies were generally by that point in four movements. Concertos, however, were in three, because concertos tended not to have, not always, but they tended not to have the dance movement that symphonies or even string quartets would have. So we have three movements, but Mozart is being very, very cute when he inserts a minuet into the presto movement. And the minuet is not very slow, but it is considerably slower than presto. And he may have done that in honor of the Noverre family. And Madame Jeune Amie, I think that would be the clearest reason. But also, the entire concerto is filled with unusual events that the audiences of the time would not have been accustomed to. And of course, the audience of the time, in addition to some concerts that would have been given, but often these were small groups of aristocrats and patrons and dignified people who wanted to get together and for whom music was the celebration. But this piece is really meant for a concert hall and for an audience because it is sparkling and it is dramatic. But what are the things Mozart does that maybe no one expected? Well, he has the orchestra play the first measure or two, but then the piano answers. And that was unusual. When the piano comes in so quickly, it's a surprise, because the way that a concerto used to go was the orchestra played an entire exposition, sonata form exposition, with a first theme, a transitional theme to a second theme in a different key, in sonata form, and then a closing theme, and then the pianist, the soloist, be it a pianist, violinist, flutist, any soloist, would come in, and there'd be a second exposition. In the first exposition, in fact, no modulation would take place. The whole thing would be in the main key, because it was left for the solo exposition to do the work that a sonata form exposition normally did. So we can call concerto form a sonata type form in which there are two expositions, one for the orchestra alone, no change of key, one for the soloist with orchestra, including change of key in the exposition. Now, this is the surprise here, that the piano comes right in measure 2, and almost says to the orchestra, I'm here too. I'm not sitting around for 5 or 10 minutes while you have all the attention. I'm getting right into this. It's a piano concerto. And the orchestra responds in the 4th measure with a repeat of its opening gesture, and the piano, not to be outdone, and in the same forte dynamic range, answers again, I'm here. Now go ahead and do what you want, but don't forget that I'm here. And then the orchestra, starting in the 7th measure or so, plays its exposition. It has beautiful second theme after a rather dramatic and stately first theme. Beautiful second theme in really 2 halves, 2 parts. Both of the themes are lyrical. Both of them are singable. Both of them quite memorable. They're really very pretty themes. Mozart is full of syncopations in this piece, full of fortes and pianos and chords and scales. It's very, very beautifully put together. And as the closing theme is wending its way toward a final cadence, the piano does the second very interesting thing. It comes in with a trill that goes for 3 measures, overlapping with the end of what the orchestra wants to do. So in a way, the piano is again saying, listen, people out there listening to this work, don't get yourself excited and don't get ready to applaud what the orchestra did, because I'm coming in right now and the best is yet to come. So after the trill, there are a few more measures of transitional material into the solo exposition, which then has the piano and the orchestra in a wonderful partnership. I would think the jesting of the piano at the beginning is good-natured. I think it's all friendly. And in fact, the Mozartian concept of a concerto is that the solo and the orchestra are in a conversation with each other. Neither one wants to harm the other one. Neither one wants to have all the attention. This is as close to 50-50 as any concerto can be. More than the orchestrally emphasized Baroque concerto, and more than the late Romantic solo emphasis, virtuosity and all that. Here it's very, very friendly. So we go through the same themes again. Later on in many Mozart concertos, the soloist will have his or her own second theme and make it very different, more appropriate to the solo voice than to an orchestra. But in this piece, because it's still very early Mozart, still he's only 20, almost 21, he doesn't have that variety of thematic material. But when the piano plays these second themes, the piano has a cantabile ability. It sings these themes out, and it's just wonderful. There follows then a development in which mainly first theme material is treated to what composers of the classical period do. They use sequence, they use inversion, they use change of direction, they use change of dynamics, they use change of registration, they truncate, they expand. So some, not all of that, but some of that is done here. A lot of different harmonic stages. There are different chords that are implied or rendered. But basically, it's finger work for the keyboard. And it's an orchestra that is commenting constantly on the thematic qualities of the concerto movement. And then you get the recapitulation, as in a sonata form. So development and recapitulation, or reprise, as it's sometimes called, happen in a concerto the same way that they will happen in a symphony movement, in the sonata allegro form. But the next thing that's quite interesting is that when you get toward the end of the movement, and this is true of concertos of the time, the soloist could and was most often expected to improvise a little flourishing section in which the orchestra atones in a way for its hogging the show at the beginning of the concerto, and all those 30 or 35 or 40 people sit quietly and have to listen to a minute or two or three or five or eight, depending on what the solo, in this case pianist, wants to do. And you will hear many different types of cadenzas. It's called a cadenza by different artists. But in this case, maybe because it was for Madame Jean-Ami, maybe he was trying to make life so easy for her, he actually composed cadenzas. I think he composed an alternate cadenza, 2 cadenzas for the first movement, another 2 for the slow movement, and maybe 3 shorties, known as Eingänge, from the singular Eingang, a German word meaning to go in or to lead into something. And those are, but Mozart wrote them all. And so the soloist would have options. And Emanuel Ax, in the great performance he gives with Berlin and Rattle, he uses Mozart's cadenzas, which is really wonderful. And they are superb pieces. So that's more or less how the first movement works. When the cadenza is over and you think, now the pianist is going to sit and let the orchestra round things off, that doesn't happen. Piano has a lot more to say even after the cadenza. And while the orchestra is trying to finish up, in comes that 3-measure long trill again, as if to say, I will never let anyone forget that I've been a big part of this. Now, of course, Mozart knew he would play this, and he did go on tour playing this very concerto and made a great success out of it. The second movement promises so many of the beautiful arias in the operas that were to come a few years later. the great operas of Mozart, Idomeneo and Abduction from the Seraglio, and then the most famous of them, Figaro and Don Giovanni, Magic Flute, have for their characters moments like the melody of the Andantino. It's in C minor, a logical key for a concerto in E flat, but it's only the first time Mozart resorted to the minor for a slow movement in the concertos. And I think he does it again so that this piece will stand out as innovative and as memorable. It's a sad type of theme. It has kind of a sighing quality about it much of the time. And it offers tremendous opportunity for the instruments and then the soloist to sing their song through their beautiful playing of instruments. I should mention that the instrumentation for this is the standard instrumentation of the 1770s, of the classical period, and that would be oboes and French horns and the strings. First violins, second violins, violas, cellos, and basses. Basses would play an octave lower than the written part for the cellos. It's not until later in the 19th century that the basses and cellos will separate and have different lines to play. But here they double at the octave. Oboes and horns go back to the Baroque time. Very popular instruments. The oboe with its piercing, beautiful, clear woodwind sound, and the horn as this glue that can connect winds to strings. The glue, even in a woodwind quintet, is the horn. And it has a wonderful feeling, these wind instruments, of spicing up the string orchestra, adding sweetness, adding punctuation, and adding support to the piano, so that they're different colors. We have the winds, we have the piano, and we have the strings. So the second movement is more or less in a three-part design, a ternary design of ABA. The middle section waxing very lyrical, very romantic, moving to different key, and then coming back to the C minor as the piece unfolds. Truly nice. C minor, of course, is a key that Mozart uses very well in the C minor concerto, which is the next to last, not next to last, it's 491, and then there's 503, and there's 527. But it is a key he comes back to and seems to favor. And it is a key that I find in the classical world, I find it not tempestuous so much as heavy-hearted. Not exactly grieving, but not at ease. That's the way I feel about it. And I think the theorists comment about that way too. And Mozart wrote a cadenza in near the end of this movement. The third movement may be the reason that the piece is so well liked. It is a virtuoso concerto movement, which one could call a perpetual motion movement. There is hardly a moment when the piano soloist can take a break. It's very demanding and wonderful. It's in a rondo form. Now, the rondo form is often used in finales of instrumental cycles. It's one that the audience can have fun following. While sonata form may take a little bit of education to get accustomed to, the rondo lends itself to easy comprehension because it really is an alternation between a main theme that you hear right away at the beginning and other themes, which are called episodes. So we have main theme and we have episodes. And this one is back to E flat major and is full of patterns, scale patterns, arpeggio patterns, and basically tonic and dominant type of harmony. So it's a race somehow. It's a race. I don't know whom the piano's running away from. It might be the orchestra, but it's really a race. And Mozart just does so many different little tricks with it, harmonic tricks, and then the orchestra comes in and repeats the rondo theme, and then, as in the sonata form pieces, the music moves to the dominant key for the first episode. And the first episode is like little drops of rain coming down the keyboard, and then little chromatic gestures, almost caressing the music. So it's quite different in its melodic maneuvers from the rondo theme, but it keeps that perpetual motion going, and you have 8 eighth notes per measure, and that's pretty speedy at cut time, 2/2 time, and marking of presto. So the orchestra and the piano get together in that episode and have a lot of dialogue, a lot of friendly exchange, one with the other, and then the main theme comes back, as one would expect. But before it comes back fully, there is one of these Eingänge, or you can even call it a cadenza because it's quite lengthy. Many an Eingang would be 4 measures only, but this is free improvisational seeming music that goes through different tempos and different patterns, and teases us a little bit about when will it finally reach a moment of cadencing, of coming back to the main theme. But eventually that happens, and the first tempo and the first theme are taken up again, and again it's the piano. Again it's the piano starting and the orchestra following. Then, because this is somewhat in the middle of the piece, Mozart comes to another Eingang, and there surprises us all with this minuet that I mentioned earlier. It is marked still in the key of E flat, but it occurs in the key of A flat. It occurs in the key of A flat, which is the subdominant key, and often used by composers in the classical and early Romantic period for contrast with the main key of a piece. The minuet is all grace, charm, loveliness, as it was danced already at the court of Louis XIV in France during the Baroque period. While there were so many dances in the Baroque, allemands and courants and correntes and passepieds and gigues and sarabands and minuets, only the minuet really remained part of the standard musical vocabulary in the later 18th century. You have occasional reference or use of the other dances, but the minuet is a staple. You'll find it in Haydn, in Mozart, in Beethoven, in string quartets, and piano sonatas, in symphonies, and here even in concerto. But this is an unusual episode, and Mozart seems to be having fun paying some tribute to the French court, the French musical establishment, the dance establishment, and of course specifically the jeune ami. He also treats the theme of this minuet to a number of variations, and they are among the most beautiful moments of the concerto. There is a time when the strings become pizzicato while the piano is legato, and that beautiful textural and articulational contrast is just to me, enchanting. It's a very, very beautiful scoring by Mozart. In a way, you have here the piano and the orchestra embracing one another as if one were the male and one were the female, and they were doing the minuet. And then that ends with some more solo music, some more Eingang-like music, and then the main theme comes back. And what's very interesting is that when the main theme comes back, the main theme doesn't really comment on what the minuet was doing. It's as if the minuet never happened. And that's kind of unusual. So the minuet ends with some trilling, and then the main theme comes back, and it's almost as if the attorney is telling the jury, or the judge is telling the jury, to disregard that that comment. But of course, we who hear the comment cannot forget it, cannot disregard it, and the minuet remains with us. Then the presto comes back, and as with sonata form, so too the rondo, which can have elements of the sonata form mixed in with it, goes to the what was the first episode and what was in the dominant key. This time it stays in the tonic, just as in a recapitulation of a sonata form. So Mozart has created here a very nifty rondo sonata with minuet thrown in too. Certainly we have two movements of music melded together. And then the various themes of the rondo take place again, this time, as I say, all in the tonic key and the E-flat major key. And there's a resounding tonic dominant type of cadential pattern near the end. But the piano is there right to the very last measure, emphasizing the main rondo idea. Yam, ba-da-dum, 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 pianissimo, ba-da-dum, and then the two big E-flat major chords to finish it. Well, with Mozart and with this concerto, you see the Enlightenment still flourishing in 18th century Salzburg. By the way, Salzburg was part of Germany when Mozart was alive. It becomes part of Austria later and is today part of Austria. But you see the Enlightenment, you see the classical style with its emphasis on good taste, balance, symmetry, euphony, it should sound good, order, those kinds of ideals for the classical composer. And on top of all that good behavior, Mozart, the little imp, Mozart, the rascal, as Peter Schaeffer has carved him out in his play, which was also a great film, Mozart keeps taste and order and balance and symmetry and euphony, but plays all of his mischievous games in dealing with the Concerto Number 9 for piano and orchestra. Maybe we should say it's for orchestra and piano, but I think it really is the piano that takes the lead. So that's the story of the Mozart Concerto.
Bravo. Bravo.
It's hard for me when I don't have a piano and I can't go and really emphasize, but it's doable.